Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. We were created for so much more than rushing through life. It's easy for everything in our lives to seem fine on the surface, but deep down, there's often another story at play, one of overwhelm, stress, and heartache, of finding ourselves stuck in old patterns. Rather than feeling the weight of it all, it's easier to spend our days on autopilot, ignoring the noise inside. But what if the peace and relief we most long for comes from tuning in with what's happening inside, instead of tuning it out? This is what author and therapist Seiple and I explore today as we talk about her new book, The Sacred Art of Slowing Down. With such gentleness, wisdom, and experience, AC invites us to connect with our bodies and get curious about the spaces within that feel most stuck, and find where we need safety, attunement, and care. Listen in. Well, AC, I'm so glad to have you on Faith and Feelings today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I once heard someone say that a book, when written well, can become a portable place of presence, a way of carrying the heart of another. And as soon as I began reading your new book, The Sacred Art of Slowing Down, I felt that through your words. You offer such a compassionate presence to your readers.
Thank you. That's really meaningful to hear. That was one of the most interesting things in writing, was wanting to offer that presence and trying to figure out, how do I do this with words on a page? So that just makes my heart so happy to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I know that you are a therapist and you bring so much of your experience into the writing of this book. So could you share some of your story and how it became woven into your writing? What was stirring in you that caused you to want to write this book?
Yeah. Really, so much of this book came out of a very personal process of formation. And so, I do write from the perspective of a therapist and as a professional. But, before that, just being a person, being, human first. And it was really the spaces that others invited me into that kind of developed this process, really kind of starting in grad school in a lot of ways, but in spiritual direction, in therapy, even in my classes, like working with ancient languages, needing to slow down in new and different ways, getting curious in new and different ways. All of that just cultivated spaciousness in my life that I didn't really have on the other end of that. I'm generally a pretty fast moving person. And so there's a really big irony with this book being called The Sacred Art of Slowing Down, because for me, to slow down has been such an intentional process that's gone against kind of like a muscle memory internally for me. And because of how beautiful that has been, and because of how freeing that has been in my life, there's just been this, really excited desire to share that with others. And there are a lot of dimensions to that, right? The slowing down is just kind of the opening to all these really beautiful things that I think we can tap into when we just even create space to slow down.
I can relate to so much of what you're sharing. I just finished grad school a few weeks ago.
Oh, congrats.
And in many ways, I feel like I'm still carrying the speed of that season, always moving at such a fast pace to keep up with classes and deadlines. And yet at the same time, I've been noticing this deeper longing in me to step into a slower rhythm.
Yeah.
And that's why I think your story in the book about sitting with your therapist resonated so deeply with me. I keep reflecting on her words to you. Your body doesn't know that you're safe. Can you take us back to that moment and share what it was like for you to hear those words?
Yeah. To be very honest, as I say a bit in the book, I didn't know how to connect to those words when she first said them. It just, there was such a disconnect in that moment. And what was really interesting is I was about a year into grad school, into my counseling program. I was just starting my clinical rotations. And, in that space, though, I was the client. In that space, I didn't have my therapist hat on, right? I was just letting myself be in this very raw, kind of unraveled place. And for her to say, your body doesn't know that you're safe, in a way, I think because of how disconnected I was from my body, it almost didn't feel like she was talking kind of to me. Like the disconnect went that deep. Now, at a head level, there was a sense of I was learning about body connection in my classes, right? I was learning about it in my training.
Yeah, and that irony, I can relate so
right?
much to that.
It just wasn't syncing up yet, but it was something that for the days, weeks, and months after, it like the presence of those words really stayed with me. And so then anytime I might be in a class or with a supervisor on one of my rotation sites or whatever it was, that something about, body connection and what's going on with our bodies would come up. It was almost like little by little, it brought depth to those words and brought more, kind of fostered more and more of a connection with my own body of like, okay, yeah, this whole therapy thing, it's not just our thoughts. It's not just our behavior, but like we are this holistic being. And even if I am disconnected from my body right now, that doesn't mean that I don't have a body. Or as Hillary McBride would say, I love how she says this, that it's not just that we have a body, we are our body, right? And just this process of opening, I think, to that more and more in a really, really sweet, formative way.
Yeah, that's so good. As you continue to process those words, how do you think they began to shift the way you saw yourself and your own healing?
That's a great question. I think it created space for some compassion and some empathy that was difficult for me to access. And, if I reduced everything just to my thoughts and behavior and just kind of like, okay, I know what the right answer should be, especially theologically or like with my faith. If I reduced that, it was more black and white of, well, I just need to get it together. Like, I just need to, get in line with the right answer and just kind of get rid of this thought or whatever it is that's complicating things. And so kind of peering beneath the surface and connecting to like the whole of, how God's created us really opened up the space to be like, oh, there is a lot more there, not only to connect to, but there's a lot more there that is longing for connection, attunement, care, spaces that I hadn't even considered inviting God into, that I hadn't even considered inviting, whether it was in the therapy room or outside of the therapy room, kind of my own process of what I was looking for in therapy. I had really limited it. I hadn't let it run that deep. So it kind of opened all that up. Not in a way that was, in moments, maybe it felt overwhelming of like, ooh, there's a lot there. But more than that, it was just this sense of like, oh, this makes sense of what I'm feeling, actually. And I don't have to dismiss or spiritually bypass what seems to be like a problem or complicating my process. But this actually gives me a roadmap to the very spaces I can invite God into.
I want to read a quote from your book that I think so many of us can probably see ourselves in. You write, "I was exhausted from riding the loop over and over. I wanted to get unstuck, but I would have absolutely never thought that the relief I was longing for might come from connecting with what was stirring beneath the surface, what was happening inside my body." I imagine that so many of us know what it feels like to be caught in that kind of loop of anxiety and stress, longing for relief, but not knowing how to find it. Can you talk a little bit about what that loop felt like for you inside?
Yeah, I think that historically, it was really easy for me to just kind of have these assumptions. I don't know who first said this, but the distinction between we're not a human doing, we're a human being. right? But I lived so much as a human doing. And so just this go, 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 do, do, do. And really, I think in a way that was more than, it wasn't just, okay, I was riding this loop of stress, or I was riding this loop of anxiety, or I was riding this loop of people pleasing or performance, or, whatever category we might want to put it under. There was something actually a lot deeper in my body, that I would say goes down to the autonomic nervous system, this muscle memory that really did not know how to move through life without kind of this like charge and without this feeling this pressure and not knowing how to fully like relax and settle. I mean, that was just so foreign to me, but it was something I longed for. There was this sense of, okay, I long for an exit from what feels like this never ending pressure that's stirring inside. But I didn't know what would that look like. And going to a yoga class or doing deep breathing or going on a walk, like none of that really seemed to be helping. And then spiritually, it'd be really frustrating of like, okay, I read my Bible, I pray, or I go to church and I sing this song that I love, or I have my, worship playlist that, it can feel great listening to it. And then I jump back in to the daily grind and it's just this loop continues on. And it's almost like I can't figure out the valve to release the pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can so relate to that inner conflict, the push and pull between the parts of us that long to slow down, to rest, to move at a gentler pace, and the parts that keep pushing forward. A few different times, I think you described those parts like an internal gas pedal pressed all the way to the floor. So could you share a little bit about what that tension felt like for you and how you began to notice and even make peace with those different parts of yourself?
Yeah. And I love you speaking parts. And as I'm sure you saw, I love weaving that in the book of as we connect internally with what's going on with the nervous system, like where's that intersection with these parts of us? And that was something that was so helpful in, my own life of the counseling and spiritual direction, things that I received of being able to name that with certain parts and seeing, okay, there's this part of me that's exhausted. There's this part of me that, wants and needs a break so badly, but also sensing like, okay, it's more than a break that I need, right? Like I really need to actually figure out how to move through life differently, but I don't know how to do that. And at the same time, there are these parts of me that I think have like this protective reaction or response of, okay, if I slow down, I'm going to have to feel some things I don't want to feel. I'm going to have to be aware of thoughts that maybe those are not thoughts that I want to have, popping up. And just in general, it's going to feel uncomfortable because it's unknown, right? We'll trust what we know over what we don't know most days, even if what we know is harming us or taking a toll because it's known. And so paradoxically, there is this sense of safety that comes with the known. And so the parts of me that can just get scared at something that's new and something that's different. And just that worry of, well, what if everything falls apart? Right. Looking back at when my therapist first said those words of your body doesn't know you're safe. And that was around the time that I started going to spiritual direction. I was doing 2 master's degrees and I had parts of me that did not want that to fall apart. Right. That was like, if I mess with the homeostasis here, what are the implications on my grades and my coursework? And, so even just to have the margin to play with something different, I think can feel quite threatening and risky to parts of us. I know for myself, that's been the case, not only in the past, but to be very candid, after starting a PhD program this past fall. Oh, it has been so humbling to see the ways that muscle memory has come back up in an academic setting and to see like, okay, I've done all of this work with this muscle memory outside of an academic setting. And now that I'm back in an academic setting, those parts are popping back up. And the intentional choices around slowing down, practicing what I preach in this book, it's been really remarkable to, I've of course said, and I believe this is a lifelong learning that we never fully master, but it's another thing to be hit in the face with that. reminder.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, in your book, you guide readers through 3 overarching movements: slowing down, tuning in with your body, and tending to the depths of the soul. And I'd love to touch on each of these. So let's start with the first one, slowing down. Can you share what this movement looks like in practice and maybe a first step someone can take to begin leaning into a slower pace?
Yeah. I think in a way that can feel like belaboring the point a bit, even just like slowing down with slowing down, I think is a necessary first part. It's funny, when I was writing the first developmental drafts of this, my editor initially was, kind of like, okay, I feel like we need to kind of like, get to the point a little more quickly. And, we need to give readers the one. And it was interesting because I had this internal conflict of, okay, do I respond to that feedback and try to shape this in the way that she's encouraging me to, or do I do something different? And I really felt the sense of like, no, like what I really want to invite the reader into is just a most gentle moving pace of, let's even slow down with slowing down, to look at why slowing down might not feel simple, why slowing down might feel complex or tricky, because a book about slowing down is not going to be helpful if we're like, okay, but I'm trying to slow down and it's not working, right? And so just even first taking that step back and creating that space to get curious about what are the things that might feel like they're standing in the way and that might feel like problems or complications in the process. And for me, this really comes to a sense of, rather than working against ourselves, working with what's happening inside. And so that's where I think if we, ironically, no pun intended, if we rush to slow down, we're likely to bypass or bulldoze over parts internally and things going on with our body, that if we bulldoze or bypass over that, we're kind of missing the opportunities to really do that deeper work of slowing down in a way that will feel sustainable and I think satisfying, right? It's, if we stay on the surface, things generally don't meet that longing deep within.
The second movement you write about is tuning in with your body. Can you talk a little bit about how we can begin to practice this deeper kind of inner attunement? What did it look like for you when you first started?
Yeah, this was a really complex one for me. I have a lot of chronic health issues. I've lived with a lot of chronic pain for most of my life. And so the way I survived that, especially from a young age of being a teenager, was to try to tune it out as much as possible. And so to tune in with my body was very overwhelming, was very threatening, was not comfortable, did not feel good. In a lot of ways was something that parts of me did not want to do. And even though the reasons behind that might be unique or different from other people's experiences, I have heard from so many people, whether it's in therapy or outside of therapy, similar things of like, okay, it just feels really uncomfortable or does not feel good initially to connect with my body. And realistically, if we're disconnected from our bodies, there's probably a reason why, right? There's probably some sort of function behind that in some way is protective or in some way might be a survival strategy. And to tune in with that, like ever so gently and ever so slowly, to start to cultivate safety so that that body connection isn't necessarily a threat or isn't necessarily at war with parts of ourselves, right? Again, that working with what's happening inside rather than against. It takes time, I think, to foster that, like any other relationship, right? And so, in that section, I love to weave in some things around polyvagal theory, some things with parts, some things with, as you mentioned in one of those quotes, this idea of this gas pedal or the brake system internally. That for me was a game changer. That initially wasn't part of what I had learned about polyvagal theory or the autonomic nervous system. And when I went deeper into understanding more of that, gas pedal and brake system, for me, it just clicked. Like that felt in a lot of ways like the missing link of like, oh, if I can connect with, if I can tune in with this gas pedal and this brake system, like that is my access point to slowing down, to tuning in with the body, and to working with my body, working with what's happening inside rather than working against myself.
I'm thinking about the chapters in your book, and especially the ones on tuning in with your body. And you offer such beautiful questions and practices that really invite people into this process. So is there one question or practice that comes to mind that you could share with listeners as a helpful starting place if they're beginning to explore this kind of deeper body attunement?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many. So in the book, to give listeners an idea, each chapter actually has 2 places to what I call pause and play. So to pause and play with the things that are in the book. And the one that just initially came to mind, so I guess I'll go with this one. It uses the image of like a mountain by the sea. And so having different elevations, right, in a mountain range, having sea level, and then having like depths of the water, like which would be beneath sea level, and looking at that as the different degrees of elevation being different degrees of stress. And something that was very true in my life is that previously, and still sometimes while working on a PhD and launching a book, I can live in such a high level of stress that when I come down, I think that I've come down to a place where I'm really fully exhaling. I'm getting into what's called ventral vagal with polyvagal theory. So really just this place where we're able to fully exhale, where our body feels safe and grounded. We can be open and play and connect with others, all these beautiful things that we long for and that sadly we kind of associate with vacation and not regular life. So whenever I started to do more of this work of tuning in, I saw, oh, I'm not actually anchoring into a place of safety. I'm just coming to a lower elevation of stress, but I'm still in a place of stress. And so kind of mapping out with this idea of a mountain, like where do I live? Where do I spend my days of, in that mountain range? And if I'm at these really high heights of stress, even when I come down, am I making my way down to that sea level where, I almost imagine kind of like basking in the sun and feeling really grounded, or to balance the high stress, is it almost like I sink into the sea and I just get so overwhelmed and just kind of shut down and get burned out and toggle between those 2 places. And just this curiosity of what might it, not only mapping out where do I spend my days, but kind of like, where do I want to spend my days? Right. And not that we can change that overnight, but that first curiosity, that first question, I think, can be the first movement toward cultivating something new and different. Yeah.
The third movement is tending to the depths of the soul, which I love. I'm wondering if you could speak into what that means to you personally, that phrase, tending to the depths of your soul.
Yeah. I think that the spaces that were really formative in my life, that in so many ways shaped and gave foundation to what I played with in this book, those spaces of therapy, of spiritual direction, spaces of spiritual formation, almost like these intangible depths that we're trying to explore or connect to there, right? And for me, it's very much a both and, where it's not only intangible because it is connected to our body, right? It is connected deep within and in our gut. You can't see, but I'm touching my gut right now. And also at the same time, there is this, I think, mysterious, intangible quality to that as well, right? And for me, and part of this is informed by Hebrew and Greek words around soul that actually reflect a more holistic understanding of our embodied being. there's just this sense of, I think practically how it probably plays out in our lives today. And I know for myself, it's like, okay, these depths that are maybe not so easy to let people see, these depths that I may be inclined to hide or protect, these depths that other people neglected or other people communicated didn't matter or weren't important. And then I've kind of done the same thing. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know how to connect to these depths within. And almost like, maybe I'll just leave them there because I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Right. And I often think of, and I write this in the book, I think several times, of these parts of us that have been like neglected or forgotten. I think those often tend to be the depths within the depths of the soul that, that can really be in need of some care. And I think that tending to those depths can look a lot of different ways. I think that can look like simple connection and attunement of like, I see you, right? And just honoring with presence the existence of those depths. I think it can look like inviting God into those depths, right? Even if it's like, okay, I don't know what it looks like to invite God to tend to these parts of me that I don't really want other people to see, that I maybe don't even want God to see, but kind of taking that risk. And I think it's always very, very slow moving. I really like imagery with animals, especially cats. And if you think of a cat that has been neglected and forgotten, if you try to go just pet that cat or scoop them up, they are likely to not receive that very well, right? And sometimes that's what it can feel like with these depths within, whether it's, being scratched or bit, or even just this learned helplessness of non-responsiveness, right? And feeling like, okay, I'm not getting any engagement back. Like, is this part of me even still alive in there?
Yeah, I can really relate to that question. How do I actually do this? How do I tend to those deeper parts of myself? In many ways, I feel like I'm just at the beginning of that journey, and I imagine it's a process that continues throughout our lives. But I'm curious if you can think of a recent story when you noticed yourself truly tending to your soul in a deeper way. Do any moments come to mind?
Yes, immediately. Many moments this past summer of being in the North Sea. So I've traditionally actually not been a big water person. I've always been a mountains girl. And when coming to Scotland, was very excited about the mountains. I was interested in the coastal path, and interested in doing like cold plunges, but not so much the sea itself. And there has been something, it's hard for me to even put into words, but I've been having a love affair with the sea this summer. And there's been something about that has been tending more deeply than I really know how to verbalize, where for me, I so deeply experience God's presence in nature. And if you can't tell, I'm a very full-on person. So, if I'm with the trees, I want to feel the trees. If I'm with the ground, I want to have my bare feet in the ground and just soak all of it up. And so there's been something about being immersed in water, like having my toes in the sand and having the cool water, up as far as I can have it go, and looking at the gorgeous, coastline and cliffs, and just being like, and feeling the wind. Wind is, for me, a really special way that I often experience God's presence, and a reminder of, so many ways that we can't see God, but knowing that God is there and feeling the wind against our skin. So the way that that's like fully immersive has been a really sweet gift to I think depths internally that, really aren't looking for a certain formula, or really aren't looking for, a certain platitude, but just these very sweet, almost like embraces. And I will also say, I think the reason that's been so sweet is while Scotland is a dream to live in, moving to another continent is a really hard transition. And this summer, increasingly, I feel like I've been able to really settle here. And so for the parts of me that went through a lot of grief in the move here, that has just those parts of me have felt really held, quite literally held. Yeah.
Well, as we begin wrapping up our conversation, we're recording this the day before your book comes out, but it will be out when this episode is released. Yes. So I'll be sure to put the link in the show notes for people to go and check it out. But when you think about this book, what do you most hope readers will carry with them from engaging with your words?
Yes. Such a hard question. The short answer is all the things.
All the things, yes.
But yeah, if I need to answer that question, I think what I would say is, back to those neglected, forgotten parts of us. I would just so love for readers to, even if it's not something that they feel like they can totally connect with or believe yet, that there would be this sense of those parts of them being seen, being honored, and yeah, that, my hope would be that would cultivate a beautiful wholeheartedness, and, as I like to say, a whole-bodiedness as well. But this aliveness that incorporates the whole of who God created.
Well, as a final question, as you reflect on your own journey, what feels most alive in you now, both on the other side of this book writing process and within this ongoing journey of learning how to slow down?
Yeah, I think kind of like a curiosity and a playfulness, and that just increasing, just the reminders more and more of, again, I can cognitively know this is a lifelong process, but it's different to really experience that in real life. And I have the parts of me that can want to get frustrated with myself really easily for that, of like, okay, dear goodness, I just wrote a book about slowing down. And this is what's happening in my day right now. And, but just, letting that be an opportunity to deepen curiosity and playfulness around that. And that's been really sweet, where it's not about, performance of, am I doing this perfectly? Right. Cause I can be really passionate about something and have a perspective on something that I want to share, but that does not mean I'm doing it perfectly. Right. By no means am I doing that perfectly. And so offering myself, I guess, that same curiosity and playfulness that I want to offer others.
So good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, AC. I am so grateful for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Isn't AC wonderful? Meeting her was such a gift. I'd love to leave you with the words she uses to close her book. Words I've been reflecting on, as I think they beautifully capture the essence of slowing down. Every facet of your entire embodied being is sacred. And no matter how many of those strands has been forgotten or dismissed, you are always welcome to join me in slowing down, tuning in, and tending towards everything that is within us. All for the purpose of creating something beautiful and new with those around us, loving more deeply, moving more freely, and being alive to all we were created for as we embody and inspire restoration, presence, and peace. I've linked AC's new book in the show notes, as well as the link to my Substack, which is a weekly resource email that I send out every Wednesday. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on today's episode, be sure to subscribe. I'd love to have you join this community. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram @TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.